So Donald Trump is out to screw you, and he couldn't care less. That's the subject of today's video, and these are the headlines today. Tariffs on screws are already hitting manufacturers, and Trump couldn't care less if car prices go up. And you guys thought I was kidding. No, he really is out to screw you. And it's actually quite interesting. Trump's putting tariffs on aluminum and steel. And I want to show you guys this chart. This is coming from the Wall Street Journal. Effectively, we trade with all kinds of countries. So here it says daily value of imported screws, bolts, and other fasteners by country. This is on 2024 numbers. You have Taiwan and China. So those are the leaders in terms of, again, imports on imported screws of this chart. Japan, South Korea, Italy, India, Canada, Germany, France, Mexico. And then you got a bunch of other countries. So it's really quite a lot. And when you read the details, you'll understand how important this stuff is to manufacturing and business. So for example, it says here, rising costs for screws are rippling through manufacturing supply chains. President Trump's tariffs implemented this month on steel and aluminum have scrambled the supply chains of companies that make everything from car parts to appliances and football helmets to lawnmowers. Regarding the car part thing, so not only will the cost of cars go up, the cost of repairs would go up also, right? Because you're talking about, again, screws, which is like in everything. You could talk about electronics, you could talk about home building, any number of things, right? It actually has wide impact on the economy. And I want to also just mention, and I showed you guys the chart before about the various countries. I mean, the U.S. supply chain, business, trade, our jobs, like everything's so integrated with all around the world. When you mess with tariffs, these kind of things, it raises the cost of stuff. Now, what's kind of going on is companies don't necessarily want to raise prices because that maybe scare off customers and lower business, right? You understand that. So some ahead of time have ordered a bunch of things, but you can't necessarily order everything because the way your supply chain is set up, you get X amount of steel or screws, however you want to say it, each month or when the shipments come in. And then if you put in like a double or triple order, maybe the supplier can't get more orders to you. And so eventually the costs are going to go up, and most companies, that's just how it is. They're probably going to raise prices on you. That's how this stuff works. Or they may just completely change the way they build things or don't build at all. So if stuff's too expensive, it'll slow down production. So that's sort of why we're watching this business stuff together. Now, the Trump plan is to basically put tariffs on everything, and then use that tariff money to put it in their sovereign wealth fund. We've talked about this stuff before. Sovereign wealth fund, the easy way to think about it is like a big slush fund. You're going to then take that money, so tariff money, to the fund. That fund will then go into Musk companies. That's Elon Musk, to do his Mars launchers or whatever stupid things that he wants to do, AI, crypto, or his billionaire buddies, whatever they want to do. And so it's like it's a tax on regular people to basically make billionaires more wealthy. That's their plan. On top of that, they keep talking about this stuff. They want to privatize everything. And this was kind of an interesting one. It says Doge wants businesses to run government services as much as possible. And I've noticed this in like many Musk interviews. He kind of has the same lines that he says all the time. But basically, he's just like, oh, I'm an awesome business person, and shouldn't the government just work just like businesses, because businesses are awesome? And if you understand how Musk runs his businesses, this essentially cut a lot of corners, keep costs, as low as possible to drive up profit margins. But when you cut corners, like, you lose out on safety. So for example, I use this example because it's essentially the key one you need to understand. Musk says he's going to have robot driving cars, and he puts all this, nonsense stuff, how awesome his cars are. But essentially what they did is they took out sensors, right? So they're camera only. Other manufacturers have sensors, and I'll just tell you, cameras plus sensors would be safer than just cameras. It's not hard to figure out. But Musk will try to convince you like, oh, no, cameras are awesome because humans have two eyes, and cameras are going to just be like human eyes. That's according to Musk. And part of also their plan, and just kind of getting into understanding how his scam works, they want to sell government buildings, right, to private companies. This is the effort to privatize. And then those private companies would re-rent the buildings back to the government. So they're going to claim that's going to save us money, but for me, it just sounds like an obvious scam. because like this is the scam. Hey guys, I'm here. I'm gonna cut everything from the government, and we're gonna do awesome. And oh, by the way, the things that we're cutting, we're gonna send it to our billionaire buddies, and they're gonna re-rent us out back to the government, right? According to them, that's going to save money, but like I said, it all feels like a big scam. I couldn't care less because if the prices of foreign cars go up, they're going to buy American cars. I hope they raise their prices because if they do, people are going to buy American-made cars. We have plenty. And this is kind of interesting more because whenever you call it Trump on stuff, he'll say you're lying or I forget. So for example, it says in the interview, the president also disputed, right? He disputed that he had instructed U.S. automaker CEOs on a call in early March to not raise prices, which executives have said is inevitable in the face of tariffs, right? So Trump Trump wants to have it both ways, right? So he wants to have tariffs to get that money for that slush fund to go into Musk companies or whatever. And then he doesn't want you to, the manufacturers to raise prices. He wants the car companies, the U.S. car companies, to eat the margins. But the car companies are like, well, it just doesn't, the math doesn't work, right? And then he's like pretending like he never asked car companies to do this stuff. Wall Street Journal reported last week that Trump had warned executives that the White House would look unfavorably on such a move, meaning that if U.S. manufacturers raise prices, leaving some of them rattled and worried they would face punishment if they increased prices. And then Trump says, I never said that. Like it's hard to follow this stuff, to be perfectly frank, because Trump and Musk aren't honest. And then they always come out and just say, well, I'm a really great businessman. Just trust me, bro. And so that's why, it's important to go through this stuff all the time. The latest thing they've been doing as well is creating a lot of anti-American sentiment in Europe. So these are some of the headlines coming out. Anti-American sentiment rises in Europe as Trump fuels anger. And then we're sending letters to France, I guess, and other places. It says U.S. tells European companies to comply with Donald Trump's anti-diversity order. Now, we talked about this yesterday, and they actually raised a lot of interesting comments. And I always appreciate you guys watching, because if you don't know, half the audience on this in our channel comes from outside the USA. So we have all kinds of people who watch and share all kinds of interesting things. Regarding anti-U.S. sentiment, this is an interesting one. So this is according to YouGov, and this is polling data on favorability towards the U.S. has fallen across Europe, right? So they're using an example of Denmark, Sweden, Germany, and France. And basically, I mean, you can see the chart here. It's all going that direction. That's essentially, as things were sort of trending in the Trumpy, musky world, favorability towards Americans not so great. Essentially what you'll see in Europe, and you guys can comment if you're in outside the USA, more boycotts of American companies, etc. Essentially they don't have to buy American if they don't want to. And the whole plan for Trump is like, oh, I'm gonna raise tariffs and suddenly everyone's gonna buy American. I mean, not necessarily, right? You can't force customers to do it. Now theoretically, to be fair to Trump and Musk, I guess Trump can make a big mandate that we should all buy Teslas and we all have to subscribe to Twitter. But but I mean, if we are indeed a free market, I think that'll be won't go over so well. And it's actually quite interesting because every time I check on Musk these days, he just keeps complaining. He acts like everyone that doesn't like him is paid by Soros. That's what he says all the time. And I'm still waiting for evidence on that. Obviously, he's not going to say anything or supply evidence really in that stuff. He's just going to have his conspiracy theories. And when I look at like kind of what they're doing, and these aren't, conspiracy theories, like, Trump signs an executive order for a sovereign wealth fund. I see that they're, say in this one here, selling government property. They want to, give it to their friends. Like you can follow the money trail on this stuff. And I always tell you guys in these things, when in doubt, follow the money. Now, regarding the letter that Trump sent to France regarding anti-discrimination laws, it's actually quite interesting. So basically, France and the USA are different, and every country is going to be different on how they treat hiring practices. So, I'll read the headline. You guys get a sense of what we're talking about here. So it says, France slams U.S. interference in firms' diversity programs. Remember, Trump and Musk are all about anti-DEI. They've been attacking Disney, all this kind of stuff. They basically, from Trump and Musk's point of view, is just make sure you hire white dudes and you got no problem. If you want to hire other people, we got a problem. That's according to Trump and Musk. France, though, they don't collect data on race. So the way things play out there is very different. One thing that really stood out to me was gender, actually. So I'll read a little bit, you understand. It says here, France states officially doesn't recognize race or ethnicity. French law bans the consideration of origin, ethnic group, or religion in hiring practices. It also bans the collection of race-based data. It's part of the state's colorblind approach to secularism, which holds that all French are equally French. Rather, French corporate efforts to diversify the workforce force more on gender and socioeconomic background. And this is an interesting one, which I didn't know. It says, for instance, France legally requires companies with more than 250 employees and significant turnover to have 40% women on the board. So again, they have different laws than in the USA. 6% of their company, if you're a certain size, has to be people with disability. That was kind of an interesting one. The Rooney Rule, which I brought up, is a U.S. rule because there's different laws and stuff. This is in the NFL, and it's not really a federal law. It's just you could say a private law. But the basic idea is that if you're hiring in the NFL, which is the football league, you have to you have to at least interview either minority or women candidates. So the description of this one is the Rooney Rule is an NFL policy named after Pittsburgh Steelers owner Dan Rooney that mandates teams interview minority and women candidates for head coaching, general manager, and coordinating positions, aiming to increase diversity in the executive roles. So, for example, it says teams are required to interview at least 2 minority candidates for head coaching, right, etc. I think, in my opinion, these kind of rules are fine. I think maybe people might disagree with me and say, "Oh, Chris, you're so dumb. We shouldn't hire anyone. Just hire white people and is the best." I think it's hard to mandate quotas. So I've never been for quotas. I'm not for that. But I know you're saying, well, that's hypocritical because isn't interviewing people a quota? Well, interviewing isn't hiring people. Because some people would make the case that something like the Rooney Rule isn't strong enough, right? But to force someone or force a company to hire a particular group of people is one thing. I mean, normally, and this is sort of how we should talk about this stuff, is you would want the market to effectively evaluate hiring. So if one company is going to be like, okay, I'm going to hire a certain kind of person. And then another company's like, you know what, we're going to open up our pool and we're going to have all kinds of people and we're just going to look for the most talented. Over time, the company takes the most talented people, regardless of your country of origin, race, gender, ethnicity, etc., is going to do better, right? The problem would be, though, for example, and this is where it gets complicated, what if every company, and for example, say in the NFL, discriminates against groups of people? Say they're not going to hire women, or they're not going to have certain people be quarterback, etc. Then you get into some real problems and you get into monopoly issues. So it's a very thorny issues, these kind of things. I know they're sensitive topics, and a lot of people don't have enough conversations about this. Regarding though employment as a whole, though, this is probably the biggest issue that people don't talk about enough, and that's going to be nepotism. So basically, how the world works, for those of you guys who've been in, you already know this stuff. When people do hiring, basically you reach out to your friends and you hire your friends first. That's for or in some situations family. That's a very common thing. And it's hard to get around that kind of stuff. And what happens is that for people who aren't born into a wealthy family or aren't born into whatever network, you're kind of shut out of said system. And so kind of in order to address inequalities and inequities, right, the idea is to encourage people to look at other candidates. So that's why I like, for me, the Rooney one, I'm fine with it. I'd like to hear different people's points of view on that one. The woman on the board thing, at least France is saying, hey, they have to be 40% women. I could certainly see people, get mad at that kind of rule, that sort of stuff. For me, the woman issue is, half the population effectively in pretty much every country. I always think it's strange, and you could call it discrimination if, like, say, if half your population is women, but then like you look at companies and say, well, I don't, just giving just an example. Let's say 90% plus are all men and of a particular group. You're like, huh, something's up with that. Now, some people, for those people who think that's fine, they'll say, well, no, but you're wrong. Those 90% of all the dudes, those are just the most qualified and the best leaders, right? Some people make that argument. The thing is, though, if you understand how the world works, though, where people are only hiring their friends or only hiring the people at the same golf club, then you realize, okay, they're not really looking at everyone. And so I just wanted to just have a chat with you about this stuff because I know it's a complicated issue, but in my point of view, since I didn't grow up with any connections and I didn't have any family, and if you guys don't know my story, I lost my family at the end of the Vietnam War, so I have a very different history than other people. I had to, forge my way forward very differently than others because I couldn't just, make a phone call and say, hey, hook me up with a job. That's what most people do. They end up following. And it's not 100% everyone, but a lot of people end up following their parents or people in their community. Whatever jobs they have, you're going to get too. And you guys will know this inherently from where you live, right? You'll know your experiences. It's not that uncommon. Like it happens quite a lot that, oh, my dad was a lawyer, therefore I'm going to be a lawyer, or my mom was a doctor, therefore I'm going to be a doctor, and you kind of lead into that way. And sometimes it's a social situation to where if you go against your parents, you do a career profession that they don't like, they get unhappy with that. So I'm sure many people out there can identify with wanting to do something different than what people around you told you to do, and you kind of don't fit in. And so I know I'm getting off on tangents, but I just want to have a chat with this stuff because it only is only beneficial for society when you have a system that is fair. Fair in the sense that we're giving people with the best talents and best skills an opportunity to rise to the top. If you have a system to where it's only people, their family members and their buddies from the same golf club, then it's basically nepotism, and then you have massive corruption because, as you're seeing with the Trump and Musk people, it's just a bunch of unqualified people at the top, right? Because they only picked their friends from Florida. That's in Trump's situation, and that's what you get. So I don't know. I just wanted to go through all this stuff. That's what's going on. It's tariffs. Trump doesn't care that prices are going up, and they want to privatize everything. So like to hear you guys' thoughts on any one of these things, and I'll catch you on the next video.